Nobody called a foul. That is where this story begins, and that is where it has always begun. Not with the attack itself, though the attack was real, captured on video, seen by millions. Not with the aftermath, though the aftermath was explosive and revealed something deeply broken about the sport. It begins in the moment after the fist connected with her throat, when the referees stood there, looked at what had just happened, and did nothing. That silence, that specific, deliberate, inexcusable silence, is what has turned a basketball controversy into something the entire sports world is now being forced to reckon with. Because what happened to Caitlin Clark on June 24, 2026, was not an isolated incident. It was not a fluke. It was not bad luck. It was the latest chapter in a 2-year pattern so consistent, so documented, so undeniable, that the question is no longer whether Caitlin Clark is being targeted. The question is why the league whose financial survival depends on her is refusing to protect her, and why the very people whose job it is to talk about it honestly are running away from the truth. Let's start with what happened on Wednesday night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. The Indiana Fever were hosting the Phoenix Mercury. With 6 minutes and 52 seconds remaining in the second quarter, Caitlin Clark and Phoenix All-Star Alyssa Thomas scrambled for a loose ball on the floor. In the chaos of the scramble, Thomas drove her closed fist directly into Clark's throat. Not an elbow, not an open palm, a closed fist, to the throat, while Clark was on the ground. Thomas then stood up and stepped over Clark's body. The referees did not blow the whistle. The play continued. No foul, no flagrant, no review, nothing. Clark got up, held her throat, and kept playing because that is what Caitlin Clark does. She is not built to show the damage. Fever head coach Stephanie White, who has spent 2 years watching this happen to her, player and fighting to get the league to take it seriously, walked to the post-game press conference and unloaded in a way that left no room for interpretation. She said they have a generational talent and a WNBA superstar who had 2 cheap shots that night that were not called. She said the fact that it was a no call was absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. She said they had spent the entire off-season looking at officiating, that the one thing they keep asking for is consistency, and abusing Bortis, that Clark is not called the same way as everybody else is called. And then she said the words that cut straight to the center of everything. She said a fist to the throat is crazy. It is crazy, it is dangerous. And when these things continue to happen, time and time again, eventually it gets frustrating. The league responded the next day by giving Thomas a flagrant foul 2 penalty and suspending her for 1 game. 1 game. That was it. 1 game, served the following Saturday against the Toronto Tempo. 1 game for driving a closed fist into the throat of the most important player in the history of the women's game. 1 game for what the WNBA's own language called a non-basketball act. 1 game for something that, had it happened anywhere other than a basketball court, would be called assault. The backlash was immediate. And then something happened that was, in its own way, more revealing than the punch itself. ESPN analyst Cheney Ogwumike went on air and said that it broke her heart that Alyssa Thomas was suspended based off a viral photo. She said the WNBA had reacted to optics rather than reality. That Thomas simply plays aggressively. That Clark embellishes contact. That when you slow the video down frame by frame, things always look more egregious than they actually were. Read that again. A national television analyst, on the largest sports network in the world, watched video of a woman's closed fist connect with another woman's throat. Video that had been reviewed and deemed a suspension-worthy non-basketball act by the league itself, and got on camera to defend the person who threw the punch. And then the Phoenix Mercury head coach Nate Tibbetts went further. He publicly blasted the league for suspending Thomas at all. He defended his player. He said the decision was wrong. He went on record, publicly, as the coach of the team whose player had just been suspended for punching someone in the throat, and questioned why there was a suspension in the first place. This is the environment in which Caitlin Clark plays professional basketball. But here is what the casual observer does not understand. What makes this moment so much bigger than a single incident? What makes it impossible to explain away as a loose ball scramble that got out of hand? This is not the first time, not even close. To truly understand what happened on June 24th, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to where this pattern was first established. Back to the very first game that told every player in the league exactly what they could get away with when Caitlin Clark was the target. June 1st, 2024. The Indiana Fever versus the Chicago Sky. Caitlin Clark's first season. A dead ball inbound play. Clark did not have the basketball. She was not in a position to receive it. She was standing on the court during a stoppage, and Chicago Sky guard Chennedy Carter walked up to her and delivered a hard shoulder and hip check that knocked Clark to the floor, away from the ball, during a dead ball, for no basketball reason whatsoever. The referees called a flagrant foul, but Carter showed no remorse. She made no apology. She walked away from the fallen Clark without a word, without a glance, without a single acknowledgement that what she had done was wrong. And the league, the WNBA, looked at that moment, and decided that a flagrant foul was sufficient consequence for a deliberate, purposeless physical attack on its most visible player. That was the signal. That was the moment the league told every team in the WNBA exactly where the line was and how far you could go before it was drawn. Less than 3 months later, in a game against the Chicago Sky again, Diamond D. Shields charged at Clark nearly at full speed and hit her like a linebacker, sending her flying horizontally across the floor. Clark shrieked in pain as her skin scraped against the hardwood. The image of her sprawled across the court was harrowing. D. Shields was assessed a flagrant foul, just like Carter before her, the same consequence, the same signal sent. Then came the playoffs, September 2024, Game 1 of the first round between the Indiana Fever and the Connecticut Sun. Clark was making a pass in the first quarter. Dijanai Carrington lunged to swat the ball and missed entirely, her hand coming down hard across Clark's face, her long fingernail driving directly into Clark's right eye. No foul was called. Clark stayed on the hardwood in visible distress. Play continued around her. The officials saw it and decided it did not warrant a whistle. Clark spent the rest of the series struggling to shoot as her eye swelled shut. The Fever were eliminated in a playoff sweep. The WNBA said nothing. No retroactive flagrant, no review, nothing. And then Carrington appeared on Instagram Live weeks later in October, while Clark's teammate Nalissa Smith poked Carrington in the eye. Carrington asked, with a smile, "Did you do it on purpose?" The Fever wall recording spread across the internet within hours. The WNBA said nothing. Then came 2025. Clark missed most of the season, 13 games played in total, due to groin and ankle injuries that accumulated from a rookie year in which she was physically targeted more than any player in the league. She watched from the sidelines as a sport she had transformed continued without her. She came back in 2026, fighting a back injury that had been there since opening day, and yet she is averaging 21.2 points and 8.2 assists per game, playing at an elite level while fighting through a back that has been tweaked and retweaked by a season full of uncalled contact. And then June 24th happened, and the cycle started again. Now let's talk about what this pattern means, because the basketball facts are undeniable at this point. But the media facts, what is happening in press rooms and television studios and podcast recordings around this story, are equally important and equally revealing. A Wall Street Journal opinion piece titled "The WNBA and Caitlin Clark's Civil Rights" argued that Clark faces a textbook hostile work environment and called for federal intervention through the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. The piece said that if evidence shows discrimination or retaliation, the government must act. Stephen A. Smith went on his show and said they have a case, that the government has an argument. He drew a comparison to the Trump administration's settlements with Columbia University and Harvard over civil rights violations, and said publicly, if the WNBA continues to allow this treatment of Caitlin Clark, the federal government might not stay quiet. He said, and these were his words, "WNBA, you have been forewarned." Smith cited Clark's own teammate Sophie Cunningham, who had already said publicly that the star player of the league is not being protected, and ESPN broadcast analyst Rebecca Lobo, who said on air that every single one of those plays against Caitlin Clark has been a foul. These are not fringe voices. These are not internet commentators operating from keyboards in their basements. These are mainstream sports media figures, people inside the same media structure that has often tried to avoid this conversation, saying plainly that something is wrong and the league is not addressing it. And yet the portion of the media closest to the WNBA itself continues to respond with the same set of arguments every single time. That Clark embellishes. That physicality is part of basketball. That rookie players always take hard fouls. That the focus on this controversy is driven by racism and the discomfort of Clark's critics with her demographic status in a sport that has historically been dominated by black players. That the whole conversation is a manufactured culture war being amplified by bad faith actors. Some of those arguments contain elements of truth. Physicality is indeed part of basketball. Rookies do take hard fouls. The racial dynamics around Clark's reception in the WNBA are real and complex and deserve nuanced examination, not dismissal, and not weaponization. But here is what is also true, and this part is not complex. This part is simple. A closed fist to the throat of the most important player in the history of the women's game was not called a foul in real time. The WNBA only acted after the video went viral and the public pressure became impossible to ignore. Chiney Aguamike went on national television to defend the person who threw the punch. The Phoenix Mercury's own head coach publicly questioned the one-game suspension. And Dijanai Carrington, still sidelined with a foot injury, watching from the sidelines, responded to Stephanie White's comments by reposting social media content that pushed back on the idea that Clark needs more protection. This is not one bad play. This is not a loose ball scramble gone wrong. This is a pattern that has played out across Carter and D. Shields and Carrington and Thomas across 2 full seasons, and the institutional response from the league has been a series of flagrant fouls and one-game suspensions and carefully worded statements, and then silence until the next incident happens. Now here is where this story gets genuinely difficult, because the full picture of Caitlin Clark is not simple either. Clark is not just a passive victim in a sport that conspires against her. She is also fiercely competitive, sometimes abrasive, and has accumulated 5 technical fouls in the current season, one of which she petitioned to have removed, and the WNBA confirmed would stand. She complains to officials. She argues calls. She engages in face-to-face exchanges with opponents that have produced double technical fouls on multiple occasions. A Los Angeles Times columnist called her oafish and spoiled in a lengthy public takedown piece. The piece argued that Clark's behavior, her reactions to calls, her demonstrative frustration with officials, contributes to the heated environment in which she plays. That criticism has some legitimacy. Stars carry responsibility for the energy they bring to a game. But here is the thing that every honest analyst on every side of this conversation eventually has to confront. Whatever Clark does between the whistles does not justify a closed fist to the throat on a loose ball play. Whatever complaints you have about Clark's on-court temperament do not require a response that puts her physical safety at risk. The fact that she complains to referees does not explain why referees are not protecting her. These are separate questions that keep being collapsed into one argument, and collapsing them is intellectually dishonest. Siyat Sohi of The Ringer said something on PBS NewsHour that cuts through all of it with remarkable clarity. She said that Caitlin Clark is a magnifying glass to a lot of issues that have been plaguing the WNBA for a long time, that the league has no clear standard or vision for how they want the game to look, that the WNBA is very reactionary. They issued the Thomas suspension because public pressure made it impossible not to, not because they had a principled officiating standard that demanded it. That is the core of this story, not the punch, not the culture war, not the racial dynamics or the demographic arguments or the federal investigation conversation. The core is this: the WNBA has the greatest individual asset women's professional sports has ever produced. A player whose 2024 rookie season triggered a $2.2 billion media rights deal. A player who sells out arenas in cities where the WNBA had never sold out before. A player who is averaging 21.2 points and 8.2 assists per game on a bad back, while fighting through a season in which opposing teams are still treating her physical safety as something optional. And the league's response, 2 years in, across Carter and DeShields and Carrington, and now Thomas, has been to hand out flagrant fouls and one-game suspensions, and hope the conversation dies down before the next incident. It never dies down, because the incidents keep happening. Lisa Leslie, who is one of the greatest players in the history of the WNBA and carries the moral authority that comes with that, weighed in after the Thomas incident. She critiqued Thomas directly and said that the response after the play, stepping over Clark's body without acknowledgement, without checking if she was okay, was not the behavior of a professional who understood the moment. That regardless of whether the contact was intentional or a consequence of aggressive play, the human response required at minimum to check on another player who is on the floor. Thomas did not check. She stepped over Clark and walked away. Now Clark is out. She left the game in the third quarter with a back issue that was directly connected to the physical contact she had sustained earlier in the evening. She will miss at minimum the following game. Fever coach Stephanie White said there is currently no indication of how long Clark could be out, that they would take the opportunity to get her treatment, get her healthy, and see what happens. She is dealing with a back injury that has been present since the first day of the season, a back that has been hit, bumped, and stressed in a season full of contact that would not be tolerated if the player absorbing it were not Caitlin Clark. A back that may be forcing the most important player in the WNBA to miss games while the league issues one-game suspensions and ESPN analysts go on television to say it breaks their heart that someone was held accountable. Here is what this all comes down to. The WNBA is at a crossroads that it did not choose and cannot avoid. On one side is the version of itself that existed before Caitlin Clark, a league with a loyal core audience, genuine basketball, excellence, and a culture that prized toughness and physicality as central to its identity. On the other side is the version of itself that Clark's arrival made possible, a $2 billion media deal, sold-out arenas, mainstream attention, a conversation about women's sports that extends far beyond the people who are already watching. Those two versions of the WNBA are in direct conflict right now, and the conflict is being played out on Caitlin Clark's body every single time she steps onto the floor. The league cannot have both. It cannot be the sport that protects its superstar, and also the sport that allows its players and coaches and television analysts to respond to a one-game suspension for a throat punch by publicly questioning whether the suspension was warranted. Something has to give. Either the WNBA develops a real, principled, consistent standard for protecting its players, all of them, including and especially the one who is personally responsible for the financial transformation of the entire league, or it continues down the path it has been on for 2 years. And down that path is a federal investigation. Down that path is a Wall Street Journal telling the Justice Department to get involved. Down that path is Stephen A. Smith saying on national television that the government has a case and the WNBA has been forewarned. Down that path is a magnifying glass on everything that is broken in the league, held up by the player whose continued health and participation is the most valuable thing women's professional basketball has. Caitlin Clark will be back. She has always come back. Through the groin and the ankle, and the back and the eye and the hip check and the elbow, and now the fist to the throat. She has always come back, and she has always performed. But there is a limit to what a human body absorbs. There is a limit to what a player can withstand before the injuries stop being temporary and start being permanent. And the WNBA has 2 years of evidence that it has been pushing toward that limit. 1 game, that was their answer. The entire sports world is watching to see if that is enough.